Okay, so Zoom is recording and Movavi normally gives me a 3 countdown. Here we go. So it's recording as well. Okay, so good morning everyone. Welcome to the first session of your topic. I am just actually going to share my screen with you because I've prepared some slides for you so that you've got a great reference for what we're going to be talking about today. If I could, that would be good. Why won't it share? Oh, that one. There we go. Share. Okay. Now, can everybody see that screen?
Yep.
Yes.
You can see the PowerPoint screen. Great. And if I put it onto presentation, you've got a full screen now with presentation?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So then I'm going to stop with Movavi because it's not managing that at all. Okay. So firstly, what I would like to do is respectfully acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting. I'd like to pay my respect to the elders past and present, and I'd like to extend my respect to any Aboriginal people who may be participating with us today. Now, I have given you some contact details for your class and for TAFE. They are on the slide in front of you now, and they'll also be emailed through to you individually, just in case you need to contact anyone.
Thank you.
The topic for the day is managing legal and ethical compliance within the workplace. I understand that some of you have studied earlier versions of this unit. This one goes quite in depth into the requirements for you within the workplace and outlines everything that you might need to know about your responsibilities. It's essential that we are able to recognise the legal and ethical implications of our work and develop a deep understanding about legal and ethical issues and personal responsibility in the workplace for making appropriate choices. Values and ethics are an essential thread that should run through our thoughts, our words, and our actions. Therefore, anything about ethical decision-making is a critical thinking process and integrates your knowledge and experience of values, ethics, policy, and research. Does anybody have any comments or questions on the definitions of legal and ethical at this point, or what the compliance might include? Or shall we continue?
Just around the compliance, Amanda, if you don't mind. So that's what I was kind of going to say. Is it's around actual legal compliance with legislation and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
And we're going to go through those in depth in respect to anybody who works in the community services area. And obviously for different industries, there are different requirements. So we're going to be focusing on community services. So I've put some definitions on the screen for you now around a definition of law, a definition around what a legal framework is, a definition around ethics or ethical values. And these are important for us to kind of understand as a basis for this unit of study. But essentially, legal and ethical frameworks provide us with boundaries. These boundaries help us to know how to behave in different situations and are essential for an individual, a society, or a workplace to function well. Legal and ethical frameworks in the community services industry define what the organisation can and cannot do and how individuals should behave in various situations. And this is often referred to as a scope of practice. You might have heard that term or that phrase within the workplace already. Drilling down a little bit more with regard to ethics, because this one can be a difficult concept for people to understand. It's not one that's often raised in schools these days, but simply stated, ethics refers to the standards of behaviour that tell us how human beings ought to act in many situations in which they find themselves. So for example, as friends, as parents, as children, as citizens, as business people, as teachers, as professionals, there are ethics that are appropriate in each of those situations. And while the words ethics and morals are sometimes used interchangeably, there is a slight difference there, and one that we need to be aware of. Ethics refer to the rules provided by an external source and tend to be universally applied. And a good example of ethics are the rules outlined within the Code of Conduct for any organisation. Morals more often refer to an individual's own principles regarding right or wrong, and they can be influenced by religious or cultural beliefs. So, hands up, has everybody read the Code of Conduct? For your
And the mandatory training. Yeah.
Has a code of conduct for students that you might want to become familiar with as well. It's very important. Okay, now one other distinction that I would just like to make before we move on is the difference between judgment and perception. This one can be quite an important one, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time working through both morals and ethics, and then through judgment and perception as we go through the course as well. You might often hear an experienced care worker or supervisor describe a task or a role to you as being something that is just common sense. Whereas what they're forgetting is that they've had years of learning about how things work and what to do in various situations, so they can respond to a situation without having to give it a lot of thought. Many of the laws, the guidelines, the policies that must be followed in the workplace may seem to be common sense, however, they're not. Every worker needs to learn the legal and ethical frameworks that apply to them. The common saying around perception as reality refers to the fact that all people receive and process messages, images, and situations very differently, and each person's perception is coloured somewhat by their own lived experiences. So if you and I were to observe the same situation, we may process it or understand it very differently. And we must be very aware of our own perceptions when we're making our own ethical assessments. We're going to be spending a lot more time on this in class, and we've got several activities coming up as we go through to develop a better understanding of how and why these issues are so important. I wanted to focus this lesson, though, on the basic principle of law, and it's called the rule of law. And it basically says that all men will be treated equally. These days it says all people, all humans will be treated equally. And it's based on the Magna Carta, which refers to the Great Charter, one of the most important documents in history. And I just want to show you a quick video, because the video, even though it's funny and takes a light-hearted view of it, gives you an understanding of why the basic rule of law is that everyone should be treated absolutely equally. So I'm just going to play this for you now to provide a little bit of understanding about where we go with this.
This may look like a plain, unassuming piece of parchment, but is actually one of the most famous documents in the world. Magna Carta, meaning the Great Charter, has inspired people across the centuries, from Thomas Jefferson to Mahatma Gandhi. But why was the Charter originally created, and what does it actually say? Let us take you back to medieval England. It's the year 1215, and the ruler is King John. Many people believe that King John was one of the worst kings in history. He imprisoned his former wife, he starved his opponents to death, he allegedly murdered his own nephew, and pulled the beards of the Irish chiefs. King John had imposed heavy taxes on his barons in order to pay for his expensive foreign wars. He punished them severely or seized their property. The barons demanded that King John obey the law. When he refused, they captured London, and John was forced to negotiate. The two sides met at Runnymede in June 1215. The result of the negotiations was written down by the king's clerks into the document we know as Magna Carta. Although most of the Charter's clauses dealt with medieval rights and customs, Magna Carta has become a powerful symbol of liberty around the world. The most famous clause, which is still part of the law today, for the first time gave all free men the right to justice and a fair trial. No man shall be arrested or imprisoned except by the judgment of their equals and by the law of the land. To no one will we sell. However, this clause was not as liberal as it sounds. The Charter only applied to free men. The vast majority of people in 1215 were unfree peasants who were ruled over by their landowners. And although Magna Carta was intended to create peace between King John and his rebellious barons, England was plunged into civil war after the popes declared the charter invalid. When King John died of dysentery in 1216, 9-year-old Henry III took to the throne. To keep the peace, Magna Carta was reissued several times during the 13th century, until it was finally made part of English law. Magna Carta has lived on for 800 years and is echoed in the United States Declaration of Independence and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Perhaps Magna Carta's most important legacy is that everyone, including our leaders, must obey the law. What started out as a document of specific complaints from a group of barons has turned into an international symbol of liberty, without which we might not have the rights we value so much today.
Okay, so quick and cheerful overview of the Magna Carta there. The reason that we start with this and the reason that this is so important is that the basic rule of law, saying that all men should be treated equally, is still with us today. It underpins all of the common law in Australia and in the UK, and in fact in any common law country in the world. And as was mentioned in the video clip, it directly informs the International Human Rights Charter, which is one of the documents that underpins the code of conduct for anybody who works in the community services or human services industries. So, any questions on that? Is it the first time that you've seen the Magna Carta, or is it something that you're familiar with before?
I actually saw it.
Oh, the real one.
London.
Yeah, it's down in Salisbury or
Yeah, I saw it. I've seen it too.
Exeter or somewhere.
So there's, I think there's about 8 iterations of it.
Mm.
Yeah, interesting. And if you walk into solicitors' offices these days, it's kind of common for them all to have a big replica of the Magna Carta on the wall. So guys, just a short, sharp lesson to begin us on our legal compliance. If you would all like to pick up your phone or your device, open up Safari or whichever web browser you use and just go to Kahoot.it. Has anybody played a Kahoot before?
I have.
You have? Got it? And then we are going to, I'm just going to get you a code to log in. So your PIN number will come up on the screen. So the PIN number, oh, I love this music. 2555371. You can see on the screen as everybody's logging in.
Not letting me type.
Won't let you in though?
I just couldn't type my name. It's all good.
Got it? 1, 2, 3.
I'm in. Oh, look.
Okay, you ready? Guys, it's only 5 questions, just a quick refresher. So, you've got a multiple choice question here. If you look to your screen now, true or false? Got it? Everyone got it. Actually, I think that skipped to the second question. I'm not quite sure why. Or maybe it's shuffling.
Oh, do you get bonus points for how quick you are?
Yeah.
So in the workplace, understanding legal and ethical requirements is your responsibility.
I'm going to do, no, I'm just a pleb.
Yeah, not everybody got it. Okay, the fundamental point of the Magna Carta.
King John sucks.
I'm on the podium, just so you know.
I like that.
Okay, 2 more. Water ethics.
Blue.
Oh, we're doing so well. Okay, 1 more, guys. Name the people the law does not apply to. I can think of one orange-tinged gentleman who believes it does
Yeah.
not apply to him. Got it. You're all incredibly clever, guys.
Brilliant teacher.
Woo!
Okay, so thank you very much for being so attentive and engaged. Are there any questions about the overview of legal and ethical compliance?
More of an observation, really, back to the Murray Jiggs days. But, you know, sort of the basic principle is, you know, everyone is to be treated equally in the eyes of the law. Where does diplomatic immunity fit into that? Because that, in theory, goes against the laws of
the
country that you're in.
Community tends to refer to people who are either seconded or working in a country other than their own. So even though they may be immune to prosecution in the country that they're in, they will not be immune to prosecution in their own country. So technically, they will face judgment, though if they've got a good lawyer, they'll be facing judgment in the country with the most lenient ramifications for whatever it is that they've done.
Yeah.
And this is where ethics, judgment, perception, etc., becomes such a subjective term, because depending on where and how you grew up, what religious beliefs you have or had, you can see certain situations very, very differently to the laws of the land. So it's always very, very important to understand the laws of the land. One interesting thing is that any country in the world that was colonized by England, including the US, is subject to common law and the rules of the Magna Carta. When you get outside of any country that hasn't been settled by the UK, then you need to be very, very well aware of the laws that apply locally, because they'll be very different. The United Arab Emirates and Sharia law is, and even South America, which is subject to Spanish law, which is completely different. Anyway, so questions? Just enough. How do you feel about the length of that lesson? Was that enough to establish the concept with you before we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So we will see you at the next lesson.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Amanda.
Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda.